Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're going to talk about a war that, well, literally made America. It didn't just redraw the map of North America, it completely set the stage for the American Revolution.
So how does a little fight in the middle of nowhere in the American wilderness blow up into a world war? And how did that same conflict plant the seeds for a revolution? Let's get into it because the answer, believe it or not, shows us how our modern world really started to take shape.
All right, first up, a spark ignites war. Our story kicks off in the Ohio Valley, back in 1754. We're not in some fancy European capital, we're deep in the contested forests. This was prime real estate, and both Britain and France were convinced it belonged to them.
And here's the spark. In May of 1754, you've got this 22-year-old Virginia militia officer. You might have heard of him, a guy named George Washington. He leads an ambush on a French patrol. This little skirmish, later called the Battle of Jumonville Glen, was the tiny spark that lit a massive, massive fuse. This young, ambitious guy, acting on Virginia's land claims, basically kicked off a chain of events that would spiral way beyond what anyone could have imagined.
So let's talk about the clash of two empires, the fuel for this fire. Because you know that fuse Washington lit? It was attached to a giant powder keg of tension that had been building for a long, long time between two very, very different colonial powers.
Okay, check this out. 20-1. That's the population advantage the British colonists had. We're talking about 1.5 million British settlers versus only about 75,000 French colonists. I mean, that is a staggering difference, right? This tells you right away that this wasn't going to be a conventional fight between equals. It was a clash of two completely different approaches to controlling a continent.
And this slide just lays it all out perfectly. You've got two totally different visions for North America. On one hand, Great Britain, with its massive population of settlers. Their whole economy is based on farming and trade, and they're constantly pushing west, looking for more land. Then you have France, way fewer people, an economy built around the fur trade, and a network of forts. And, this is key, they had strategic alliances with Native American tribes, who, you can imagine, were not thrilled about that expanding wall of British settlement coming their way.
Okay, so now we get to how this becomes a war for the world. We're moving from North America to what history calls the 7 Years' War. See, this is the point where things get really big. Previous fights between these empires usually started in Europe and then trickled down to the colonies. This time, it was the other way around. The colonies lit the fuse for a global war.
So let's look at the timeline. At first, things were going really, really badly for the British. From 54 to 57, the French and their native allies were just dominating. They knew the terrain, they were masters of woodland combat, and the British army and their bright red coats marching in straight lines were just easy targets. But then came the turning point. In 1757, a new prime minister in London, William Pitt, decides, you know what, North America is where we win this thing. He commits massive resources, we're talking tons of money, troops, ships, and everything starts to change. By 1758, the tide is turned, and the British start capturing one French stronghold after another, leading to the fall of Quebec and then Montreal.
And this is the big takeaway here. For the very first time, North America wasn't just a sideshow. It was a main event in a global war. The 7 Years' War is often called the first true World War, a dispute that started in the backwoods of Pennsylvania, escalated and pulled in empires and armies from all over the planet. The fighting spread to Europe, the Caribbean, Africa, even India. It was huge.
So after all that fighting, we get to the endgame, the new map of America, courtesy of the Treaty of Paris in 1763. And this treaty, wow, it didn't just end the war. It completely, fundamentally changed the map of North America forever.
Just look at these changes. The terms were absolutely decisive. France basically kicked off the mainland of North America. They had to give up Canada and all their land east of the Mississippi River to Great Britain. And Spain, who was France's ally, had to give Florida to Britain. So, to make it up to them, France handed over the massive Louisiana territory to Spain. It was a total reshuffling of the deck.
And you might be thinking, why would France give up a whole continent? Well, this quote from the philosopher Voltaire gives us a clue. He famously called Canada a few acres of snow. The truth is, France made a cold, hard economic calculation. They chose to keep their tiny but incredibly valuable sugar islands in the Caribbean. Back then, sugar was like oil today. It was a massive moneymaker, and to the French government, it was worth way more than the Canadian fur trade.
So the result was crystal clear. French power on the North American mainland was just gone, wiped out. This left Britain as the one undisputed colonial heavyweight. They were dominant. But, as we're about to see, this absolute victory created a whole new set of problems. Which brings us to the seeds of revolution. The war's unintended consequences, because winning this huge global war came at a staggering cost. And ironically, the very things Britain did to win would lead directly to the collapse of its own American empire just a little over a decade later.
You can see it right here. It's like a domino effect. Step 1, Britain wins but racks up a crippling amount of debt. Step 2, how do you pay that debt? Well, Parliament in London decides to impose new taxes on the American colonies. Makes sense, right? But then, step 3, the colonists look around and realize the French threat is gone. They don't really feel like they need British protection anymore. Which leads to step 4. They start resisting these new taxes and policies, which they see as an attack on their rights. And just like that, you've set the stage for the American Revolution.
But there's another, really crucial and often overlooked consequence. For the Native American nations, the British victory was an absolute catastrophe. For decades, many tribes have been incredibly savvy, playing the French and the British off each other to protect their own land and sovereignty. With France gone, that delicate balancing act was over. They lost a vital ally, a trading partner, and now they face the full, unchecked force of British colonial expansion, all on their own.
And this quote from historian Colin Cavaway really puts it into perspective. He says that the American Revolution, which was a direct result of this war, was one of the darkest periods in American Indian history. It's such a profound and tragic legacy. For indigenous peoples, the outcome of this conflict was just an unmitigated disaster that led to a devastating loss of life, land, and freedom.
So it all leaves us with this huge question to chew on. Was the American Revolution basically inevitable after 1763? Think about it. By completely kicking its biggest rival out of North America, did Great Britain accidentally make its own downfall a sure thing? They created the perfect storm, right? Massive debt, new taxes to pay for it, and a bunch of colonists who suddenly weren't scared of the French anymore. It seems like the very war that made Britain's American empire so powerful was also the war that broke it. A pretty wild thought to end on.